I'm Giuseppe Caiazzo from Silence+other Sounds. In this video I'm going to demonstrate the horn and flute pads module in Maleventum. Maybe some of you already have seen the trailer and the full sound demonstration. For those of you that are new, Maleventum is a Kontakt library inspired to the sound of war horns from ancient Nordic cultures. It's a Kontakt instrument based on two different modules, a sound design one-shot sound effects module that I demonstrated in the previous video, and an MPE compatible playable instrument based on pads and textures that have been obtained by designing and manipulating recordings from these original instruments from the Viking and Celtic tradition. Before starting, I would recommend you have a look at the full sound demonstration. There is a video, an entire video of 50 minutes entirely based on sound, where you will have a pretty wide perspective about the sounds that you're going to find in Maleventum, both the sound effects as the playable pads. Also, we are running a deal for Maleventum of $39 or euros that will be until October 31st, where you will also have the possibility to add any other Kontakt library to your order at half of the price. So let's have a closer look at the playable horns and flute module in Maleventum. Very basically, this module is based on the idea of having 4 different layers of sounds that can be independently controlled. More specifically, we have 2 tonal layers and 2 textural layers. Here from the main panel, you can see these 2 big sliders here at the middle, which respectively control the volume of the first tonal layer 1 and the second tonal layer 2. Then we have these smaller sliders here on the sides that respectively control the volume of the textural layers T1 and T2. You can select the sound for each one of these layers by using these menus here at the side of the GUI. For tonal layers, you have these 2 menus here where you can select from 64 different sounds. For the textural layers, you can use this menu down here where you can select from a different set of other 64 sounds. Very quickly, here upon the volume sliders you find these buttons here, and this basically allow you to activate or deactivate a layer. So if you do not want to use one of the layer, rather than lowering the volume, just deactivate it by using these buttons. You will also save some load on your CPU. Then we have these two buttons here. One is called split, which, as the name suggests, basically splits the virtual keyboards in 2 halves, so that you will have on the first half in blue only sounds from layer 1 and layer T1, whereas you have on the other half, the red one, only sounds of layer 2 and layer T2. And this can be interesting if you want to independently play the layers rather than playing them all at once. This in particular was inspired by a feature that is very common in bagpipes, which are peculiar of the Scottish tradition, but also they are very, very recurrent in the tradition of Southern Europe and in some regions in Italy in particular. Basically, the instrument, both in Scotland as in this Italian region, is based on this bag that sort of emits this constant low droning sound. And then there is on the top another set of chanters that can be played independently from the low droning sound, and you can play some melodies on the top of that goes in the background. So I wanted to sort of reproduce the same thing with the layers, and you can do this by splitting the keyboards in 2 halves. I'll give a quick demonstration. So by using split, you can do exactly this. You can keep a low sounds in the low register that stays always on the same note, on the same pitch, and then playing other things, different sounds on top of that. Okay, let's turn off split and let's go back to the default status of the instrument. And let's see this one here, 1/2. If I click on 1/2, as you can see, the volume slider of layer 1 and T2 are grayed out. And even if I go to the edit panel where we find other of the sound shaping parameters, well, this panel is organized in this way. Layer 1 and the controls of layer 1 and layer T1 are all on the left side, whereas layer 2 and T2 are on the right side. And you can see that everything here on the right side of the interface is grayed out as well. So that means that when 1/2 is activated, the controls of layer 1 and layer T1 control also layer 2 and T2 respectively. That means that you see, just by using the volume slider of layer 1, it controls the volume of layer 2 as well. And I could show you the same also with the texture that I activate here. And the same thing is also for the for other parameters that we find in the edit panel. For example, if I close the filter when 1/2 is activated, let's turn off the textures, otherwise that can be confusing. You see, the filters on layer 1 affects layer 2 as well. So this can be useful if you want to control multiple layers, multiple controls of multiple layers with just one control. And this works also when split is activated, so these two controls here are independent. Let's go to the edit panel, and as I said, we have the controls for layer 1 and T1 on the left side, and the controls of layer 2 and T2 on the right side. So let's start from the top. We find a volume envelope that is composed of, that features attack and release. So the big horizontal layer controls the tonal layers on both sides, whereas the smaller one controls the textural layers. If we move down, we find the filter section, and we see that there are these two knobs that are like enclosed into each other. And very simply, the big knob here, for example, of the low pass filter, controls the tonal layer, whereas the smaller one here only controls the textures. And the same is for the high pass filter. We see these two independent knobs here for layer and for tonal and textural layer. Same thing is also for the LFO, where you can individually control the rate for layer 1 and layer T1, and the amount of the LFO as well. The only exception is this switch here and this menu here. When we select, for example, LPF or HPF, we are setting the LFO to one of these two filters. And this affects both the filters for the tonal layer as for the textural layer. So this one will set the LFO to the high pass filter for both the tonal layer as for the textural layer. And same thing is for the menu here, for this menu here. If we select the shape of the LFO, this will affect both the tonal as the textural layer. So what I said for layer 1 and T1 is exactly the same for layer 2 and layer T2, so I won't spend words on this one. Well, one thing that I forgot is the resonance here. This is the this bigger slider here controls the resonance for the layer 1, whereas the smaller one is the resonance for the textural layer. So these are the sound shaping parameters in the playable module in Maleventum: volume, filters, and volume envelope, and LFO as well. In the next section, I'm going to show you this panel here, mapping, where you can very flexibly map all of these parameters that I showed you so far to your controller, regardless if it's an MPE controller like the ROLI Seaboard Rise or a standard MPE controller. But I will differentiate the two cases. So there will be a section of the video that is specifically concentrated on MPE and in particular on the ROLI Seaboard, and another one where I show you how you can map these parameters if you don't use an MPE controller. So just use the time marks in the description and choose the section that works best for you. So as you see, what I have here is a ROLI Seaboard 25. And before actually going into the details about MPE, I would like to spend a few words about how the mapping screen in Maleventum that you see here actually works and how it has been conceived. And the very first thing that I would like to say is that although you can perform it in MPE mode, you can use this panel here to map all of the sound shaping parameters that I showed you so far to any controller, regardless if it is an MPE controller or a standard MIDI controller. I will dedicate a specific section later in this video. So in regard to this panel, however, it has been created and scripted with this specific reference to the physical controls that you have on the ROLI Seaboard Rise. And I will spend a couple of words about which actually these controls are. First of all, the ROLI Seaboard Rise has a slide control. This means that you can slide your finger along the soft key that you have on this sort of bumping keyboard, and you can use this movement to control any of the sound shaping parameters here in Maleventum. And as I will show you, you can map any of the available controllers to any of the physical controls that you see here. Now, besides the slide, you have also this other section on the left side of the ROLI Seaboard, where you have this XY pad and this other where you can use both the horizontal and the vertical direction, and these other three sliders here. And each one of these controls comes with a custom MIDI channel, with the custom MIDI channels that are assigned to each one of them. By default, the slide is assigned to MIDI channel 74, the horizontal direction of the XY pad to 113, the vertical one to 114, and there's these three sliders here that are assigned respectively to 107, 109, and 111. Now, as long as I know, you cannot change the MIDI channel to which slide is assigned. But if you open the ROLI dashboard, you can see that you can change the MIDI channel of all the other ones. You can change the MIDI channel of 113, of the XY pad in both directions and the other ones. So if you have made any changes to the default MIDI channel, the MIDI channels in the ROLI Seaboard Rise, you need to make sure that each one of these buttons match the same MIDI channel. Actually, as you see, this section here corresponds to the horizontal direction in the XY pad, this one to the vertical one, and these three here correspond to the slider. So if you have not any changes to the MIDI channel from the ROLI dashboard, then you do not have to worry about these small numbers here that can be manually changed. So, for example, if you have from the ROLI dashboard assigned the horizontal direction of the XY pad to another MIDI channel, then you have to manually type the channel that we have chosen here so that they match and you can do proper mapping. This is a very important thing if you want the instrument to respond to your settings that you do here in the mapping panel. So say this, let's see how actually it works. Let's suppose that I want to assign the volume of tonal layer to the slide, and I want it to increase when I move my fingers up. So what I'll do here is to select this MIDI assignment button corresponding to layer 1 and click on this one. As you see, it becomes blue, exactly as in the main panel how the corresponding color to tonal layer 1. So if I do this, okay, very simply. As you probably have noticed, when I move my finger on the entire length of the key, the volume only ranges in a restricted interval of values. When I'm here at the lowest height of the soft key of the ROLI keyboard, of the ROLI Seaboard, the volume is sort of a half of the value. When I move my finger up and I get the highest point, it does not even reach the maximum. And this is because in the mapping panel you can set the range within which the parameter that you want to map actually changes. And as you see, it does not correspond to the full range. If I want it to actually correspond to the full available range, I have to change the extremes of these this control here and make sure that this triangle becomes entirely white. In this case, you see that now you can modulate the volume along its full available range. And I think that is an interesting feature because it gives you more flexibility. And you can do this separately for layer 1 and layer 2 as well. You see that this other triangle that has this sort of red shade, because as you remember, we have indicated layer 2 and layer T2 with red. So the basic concept is this one, that you can map any of the available sound shaping parameters for both tonal layers, as you can see here, 1 and 2, as the textural layers T1 and T2 on any of the available physical controls. For example, if I want to do exactly the same thing to assign the volume of layer 1 to the slide, but I want it to work in the opposite direction, that means that it increases when I move my finger down, all I have to do is to click on this other triangle here on the MIDI assignment button, and you will see that okay, that's very simple. And I can do exactly the same also for layer 2. Okay, and I will choose this other set of triangles. As you see here, they are indicated with this small number. And to any other available control. For example, if I want the low pass filter of layer 1 to be controlled, for example, by this slider here. Okay. Okay, once again, you see that it does not, for the low pass filter, it was not set on the full range. Now that I've set it, okay, and I can do the same for a high pass filter for the LFO amount, and the same, which is identical also for the textural layer. So a lot of flexibility. One thing, let's just deactivate the MIDI buttons here for the low pass filter, and let's go back to volume. One thing that I like to do is actually this one, is to assign the volume of layer 1 to the slide in the down to top direction, and the volume of a layer 2 to slide in the opposite direction. So let's restrict a little bit the range of both and make sure that they are exactly the same. Okay, this is the minimum range that you can have. When I map the two volumes this way, this is what happens. Sorry. When I'm here, I have the volume of layer 1 at the maximum level according with the range that I've set, and layer 2 at the minimum. When I move my finger down, exactly the opposite happens. And so I think this is very interesting that because it allows you to create some nice blends of sounds. As this instrument is based on layers, you can take advantage of the slide function, the slide control on the ROLI Seaboard Rise to blend the layers in an interesting way. Just for the sake of explanation, if I set for both tonal layers the full range of the volume, this is what happens. So it's nothing else than a crossfade between the two layers that you can easily perform just by moving your finger up and down. And it sounds like they morph from each other into each other. And of course, there are some layers that work better with other ones, so I strongly encourage you to experiment here with the available sounds and see which one you prefer or that you enjoy more playing. And another thing that I really like to do, if I go back to the mapping screen, is to keep this mapping here for the tonal layers. And if I go to the textural layers, I like to assign one of the two, for example, texture 1 to this, which is the horizontal direction of the XY pad, and increase the value when I move my thumb towards right, and the other one in this direction. So textural layer 2 increases the volume when I move my thumb on the vertical direction up. Okay, so when I move my thumb in this area, I can create some interesting blends of the texture and keep it independent for what I do on the keyboard. So I can create interesting blends and mixes between the tonal layer and the textural layers, and having a lot of control of that. So let's try an example. I will activate all of the layers here. Just let me select some of the textures that I prefer most. Urlo bianco, for your information, means white scream in Italian. And I like also this one. Just let me find it. It's Swarm Chanter. Right. Okay. I think that there is some LFO, to one of the textural layers. So let's get rid of that. And let's also, for the tonal layers, use a smaller range. So just one note and the continuous, let's say, swelling of all the volume values. And nothing stops you to do the other assignment, for example, to the low pass filter. I might use these controls here, these three sliders here, to control the low pass filter of layer 1 or layer 2, and do other settings for the filters on the textural layers. So one thing that I would like to highlight is that so far I'm not using MPE. I'm just using the ROLI Seaboard Rise with a single channel mode, so it's not different from any controller except of the slide. This was just to give you an idea about what you can do with mapping and what is the basic concept behind it. One very last thing, because before passing to the section that is specifically dedicated to MPE, is about these two controls here, pitch bend and press. Well, pitch bend just allows you to set the amount of bending for the note that goes up to 12 semitone, which is the maximum that you can have in Kontakt. So just let me deactivate, just let me leave only layer 1. Maybe the volume is a little bit low, so I'll do it manually. Oh, my fingers was sort of slipping. Okay. As I said, we are not in MPE mode. We'll see with the MPE multis that you can have independent bending at note level. And this other one here, so let's set pitch bend again to 0, is basically an aftertouch control. It allows you to, it's by default assigned to volume. You cannot assign it to filters or to the other values. It basically allows you to control the volume of the layer by pressing your finger on the soft key of the ROLI Seaboard. Sorry, maybe the volume is a little bit low, so just let me get rid of this mapping here. So as you can see, as I press my finger, there is sort of swelling effect. I have to say that the aftertouch control in Kontakt is a little bit clunky, so you might need to experiment which of these sounds works better with this effect. So let's get back to 0. So this was an overview about how you can do mapping, and as I said, I've explained it for the ROLI Seaboard Rise. There will be another section of the video that will explain you how you can use this same screen with any other controller. So, said this, let's go to the next section that will be about MPE. Well, if you own a ROLI Seaboard Rise or maybe an Hack and Continuum or any other MPE controller, you might be familiar, of course, with what MPE is about. But I would like to spend a couple of words to briefly describe MPE to those that maybe are new to this word. Well, very simply, MPE is the acronym of multi-polyphonic expression. Well, I don't want to dwell too much into the technical details, but I will describe you what is the difference between MPE and standard MIDI. In MPE, you have the possibility to control sound shaping parameters, for example, the ones that we have described here in Maleventum, at note level. Let's do an example. If I have a standard MIDI virtual synthesizer, maybe, okay, with a non-MPE controller, with just a regular keyboard, if I play a chord, okay, and I change the value of the low-pass filter, for example, that value is going to affect all the notes in my chord equally, okay? Or if I apply some pitch band, if I move, for example, the pitch wheel, all the notes in the chord would be equally banded, okay? Instead, with MPE, you have the possibility to control these parameters, for example, the filter or the pitch band, individually for each note, okay? And so this possibility to individually control this parameter at note level gives you the possibility to have more expressive performances, etc. Of course, you need an MPE compatible controller, you need an MPE compatible software, and of course, an MPE compatible DAW. In the manual of Maleventum, there is a list of MPE compatible DAWs or others like Ableton Live, which are not by default compatible with MPE, but you can set them to be used with MPE as well. Kontakt, of course, supports MPE, but you won't be able to use MPE with single NKI instruments. You need multis. So if you want to use MPE on your ROLI Seaboard Rise or any other MPE controller with Maleventum, just go to the MPE multis folder and you will find a series of 58 multis that are pre-mapped, and you can just use them. Pretty straightforward. But I would like to give you some demonstration about the MPE functionalities in Maleventum, and I've chosen this multi here, okay? And if I go to the mapping screen, probably you will recognize this mapping for the tonal layer, for the volume of the tonal layers that I particularly like. So if I play multiple notes, maybe this. So as you probably notice, I can set a different blending on volumes for each one of the notes that I'm playing simultaneously. It means that for this note, I will have, according with where my finger is along the key, I will have a specific blend of the volume between layer 1 and layer 2. On this other note, I will have another one, and this other note here, I will have another one again. And so this is the great advantage of MPE, that you can have at note level independent and individual assignment of the sound shaping parameter that you are choosing. And I think that this works particularly well with layers, because in this module of Maleventum, rather than relying a lot of adding effects to shape your sound, I've decided to use layers that you can combine them in a variety of ways and obtain something new. And MPE is very, very well tailored to do this, okay? I will do another example with pitch band. So let's suppose you set pitch band to this. So as you see, of these two notes, I am only bending this note, okay? Whereas this other one remains on the same pitch. This would not be able, as I said, if you used a standard MIDI controller. Both of the notes would be equally bended if you use, for example, the pitch wheel. So, well, a very important thing that I forgot to say, but probably you're already familiar with that, is that if you want to use the MPE multis in Maleventum, you first need to go to the ROLI dashboard, like you see here, and set the ROLI Seaboard on multi, okay? And then you have this range of MIDI channels from 1 to 8. This one basically determines the multipolyphony of your instrument. It means basically, very briefly, how many notes you want to control individually at once when they are played simultaneously. Okay, let's consider this as the degree of independent control on the individual notes. You will find that all the multis in Maleventum are made of a stack of 8 instruments, so this means that you have a multipolyphony of 8, so you can have 8 notes that can be individually controlled at once. If you want to play a chord with 8 notes, I would suggest you have, if you want to have a closer look, a deeper look at how you can create your own MPE multis, there is a specific section of the manual that is very, very quick and straight to the point that explains you to do that. So in case you are interested, go there and then you will see that there is a very simple procedure to create your own multis. So I think that I've explained everything, the very basic of MPE. And one important thing is that if you are not using a ROLI Seaboard Rise, or maybe you are using, I don't know, ROLI blocks or another controller, remember to make sure to check, let's say, the MIDI channels of the actual physical control that are using. If you want those physical controls to correspond to any of the MIDI assignment buttons here, you need to manually change the MIDI channel from here. Okay, manually type it and make sure that physical control and MIDI assignment button are set on the same MIDI channel. Otherwise, you won't have proper mapping. So I would say that it's everything about MPE. I don't think that I forgot anything. So let's move to the next section where I will show you how you can use the mapping panel on a regular MIDI controller. As you see, what I have here is an Akai MPD32. And I've chosen this controller, first of all, because it's the controller that I have besides the ROLI Seaboard, but also because I want to show you that you can use the mapping panel in Maleventum to map all of the parameters that I've described so far, regardless of the kind of controller that you have. So even if you have a standard MIDI controller like this one, you can still use this mapping screen here. The only thing that you need to keep in mind is which MIDI channel corresponds to the physical control of your controller that you want to use to control any of the parameters in Maleventum. Now, in the case of the MPD32, if for example I want to use this knob here, I know that the MIDI channel is 22 because it displays on this small blue screen here. Probably you won't be able to see it from the video, but trust me that when you move the knob, I see MIDI channel 22. If I want to use this one, it corresponds to MIDI channel 23. The other one is 24, etc. But let's stick to this one, to the first one, K1. Okay, if I want to use this one to map, for example, the volume of one of the layers, let's suppose tonal layer 1, we can choose any of these MIDI assignment buttons and change this small numerical value here and match the value of the MIDI channel with one of the physical control that we want to use. So in the case of this one, we need to type here manually 22. Okay? In this way, we have matched the MIDI channel of the physical control with the MIDI channel of the MIDI assignment button. So if I want the volume of the tonal layer to increase when I move the knob clockwise, I will click this button. And if I go to the main screen, you see, that's simple, it works. Just for the sake of the example, let's also suppose that I want to invert how my value change. So when I will when I will move my knob in the opposite direction, the volume will increase rather than decreasing. Okay. And if I want to use another knob, for example this one, I can either change the value here or I can use another MIDI assignment button, and once again we need to make sure that the MIDI channel and the value here are the same. So this knob is on MIDI channel 23, so if I want to use the second MIDI assignment button, I will type 23 and I assign the volume to this other one here. So it's very simple and straightforward. So the only difference with the ROLI is that this becomes simple assignment buttons. It sort of detaches from the corresponding physical control on the ROLI Seaboard. The only limitation that you have is that you can only use these ones. So if you're, like in this case, your MIDI controller has more physical controls than MIDI assignment buttons, then you are limited to the number of MIDI assignment buttons that you have here in the panel of Maleventum. So it's very, very simple and easy, and you can translate it on any controller that you have. So, guys, I think that this video is a nice and detailed description about how you can use the playable pads and module. As you have probably noticed, I didn't play too many sounds because I decided to divide a video that is just purely based on sound, that is the total sound demonstration, that once again I recommend you to watch, and another one that goes a little bit deeper in the details. There is one very last thing that I didn't describe in detail, which is this screen here, FX, but I won't spend words about this one because I have another video, a previous video, when I've described the sound effects module that features exactly the same module, the convolution module, that works perfectly the same way. And so if you want to discover a little bit more about this module, I will recommend to see the detailed walkthrough of the sound design module. Skip to the convolution section and you will find a full detailed description, okay? So I think that's all, guys. Once again, Maleventum is an intro deal of $39 or euros. That will be until October 31st, and plus you will have the possibility to add to your order any other Kontakt library at half of the price. Another thing, don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you want to stay updated on my sound libraries and everything that I'm going to release. And thank you for watching. Bye.